never had an intro like that. This is
That's how
awesome.
we roll in South Florida.
I think you're in the right role here, man. I think you bringing community together speaks to your strengths. That's
Well,
pretty good.
thank you very much.
It's just a privilege to be with you all, and thank you for showing up and for doing this. I'm just really honored by it. So, I'd love to talk with you about this whole idea of feedback because it's so integral to what we do as coaches. So, what I'm going to do is share screen here a little bit. And oops, let me stop for a second. I want to make sure that that I that I maximize for sound. So there we go. And all right. So is this visible to everyone? Good. Good, good. So there is a little scannable code up there as well. And I'll try to drop that into the chat as well. And so if you are interested in getting the book and would like to enter yourself in for a drawing for that, then I'm happy to, we'll see who signs up today. And then we'll do a drawing. My admin will do a drawing for that. And we'll send a book out to you for Feedback Reimagined. So I put it into the chat there. And I think that should take you to our website where it talks about how we certify coaches in this methodology. And so if that's of interest to you, I'd love to connect with you and learn more about you and make that offer. So as we get into this, then I have a question for you. And this is one that I want you to put in the chat. And that is, why is feedback hard?
We'll give you all a minute to think about that for a moment and pop it in the chat and we'll see what comes out. We'll see if anyone gets the right answer because I'm pretty sure there's only one correct answer for this.
Yeah. Because people's feelings get hurt because people hold it as a negative. Hard for whom? Ah, very good. That sounds like a coaching question. Yeah. Answer a question with a question. There we go, Hannah. Yep. People don't like to hear what it sounds like. Hard if they take it personally. It means to most people that something about it means they're not good enough. Brain resists that message. Oh, these are really interesting. I like that.
Maybe there's more than one right answer.
Uh-huh. There are many answers. Yeah. So I want you to participate in a little feedback here. Alan's your general manager. And he's 6 months into his new role. He's known for his work ethic, integrity, always being willing to help out. No task is too small for him to support. He's responsive to phone, text, and email, ensuring he responds the same day. He's known for being detailed, yet also able to see the big picture and understand how to create impact. At the same time, Alan struggles to rise above the day-to-day aspects of the job. He gets very involved in the details. Many have noticed his ongoing stress level and have expressed concern over how he's handling the new role. He takes time to make decisions, running his thoughts by several people before deciding. There seems to be more talk versus action. So think about, in this scenario, Alan is your new manager. What's the feedback that you have for him? Type it into the chat, but don't hit the return button yet. And then give me some sort of signal when you've typed something into the chat.
Yeah, when you've got it in the chat, just use the digital reaction, the raise your hand, and then we'll know if everybody's ready. And then we'll let you send your replies at one time. I guess that's the answer. I don't know, Pete.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
All right. I see a thumb there.
You got one. Keep putting in your replies. Just don't hit the enter key yet.
Benny's there. Benny has a very active thumbs up. Catherine's there.
Yeah.
Val's there. I like that. All right. Good. Anna, how are you coming? Joanna's there. Nope. She's not ready yet. Feedback seems to be hard to come up with. For who? She asked. For who is feedback hard?
Sue, just go ahead and write your, it says put your feedback for Alan in the chat. So just write it into the chat. Just don't hit the enter or the return key, because we're going to let you guys, we're giving everybody a chance to come up with their own ideas before they start seeing other people's answers.
Oh, okay. I was just talking to someone in that moment and I didn't listen to the story. So I'm going to skip this little exercise.
Just read the screen. It's right there.
Oh, okay. I see. My glasses on.
All right. Why don't we do our countdown? And whatever you have is totally fine. Okay. So we're going to go 3, 2, 1. Hit your return button. It's bigger so I can see it. How can we make this easier for you? In the spirit of doing good, he is not doing good for himself. I would ask Alan how he's feeling about his new role. Your work ethic, integrity, and willingness to support are exceptional. I'm concerned about your stress level and perception of difficulty in decisions. Oh, Joanna, very complete there. Yeah. Starting with the strengths and then showing personal concern. So what are your observations about not just the feedback, but the experience of coming up with the feedback? What did you experience when I asked you to offer feedback to Alan?
You want us to write it or say it?
I like when you come off mic. It's great, Benny.
Yeah. I would say maybe it's easy for me to judge it by what I'm reading and not have all the information still.
Okay. What did it feel like when you were trying to come up with what to offer to Alan?
Not hurt his feelings.
Yeah. Yeah, you didn't want to hurt his feelings.
Sensitive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I was trying to think of a way to phrase it that wouldn't make him defensive.
Val, it looks like you came up with me or Kim. Yeah.
Yeah, Pete, I would say the same as the others have said, and that I really wanted to invest in something that would energize him, not deflate. So less about his feelings and more about how can I invest in him and not take away. And that was hard.
Yeah. Did anybody have the experience of it's like, come on, man, you got promoted into this. You're holding us up. Let's get this going. Why can't we just tell him? Okay. Catherine, you put your camera on. Did you have something to add? Yeah. What was it like?
Yeah. When I give feedback, I always try to open up the conversation to allow the person to say it to me.
Say more.
So I would be hoping that he would say, I feel like I'm doing this and this and this well, but I'm struggling with some of the decisions I'm asked to make.
Okay. Yeah. That self-realization or self-insights into where their struggles are. Okay. Good. You're answering like a lot of coaches. You're trying to do it in a constructive way and figure out how to do it. Now, if you're an employee, if instead I changed the scenario to you are Alan's boss, you might have a different perspective. You might say, why can't we just use radical candor? Why can't I just say it the way that it needs to be said? Why can't he fix it? Why can't he stop doing this? It's evident. So I use this as an example because I want you to experience or feel what it's like to be in that place of wanting to offer feedback to someone else. And so here's when we talk about why feedback is difficult. I think feedback is broken for some pretty important reasons. One is around design flaws. Oftentimes, feedback is tied to promotion, raise, compromise, and what it does is it compromises intent. It's like, is this performance feedback or is this developmental feedback? And that gets mixed up oftentimes. One of the main reasons why it's difficult, why it's broken, is because it's confidential. So the first thing that your client says is, who said that? I need to understand who it is. And that's because context matters. You lose context, you lose tone, you don't know how it's intended, you read a report, and it just is baffling to you. Also, the focus itself, regardless of how many strengths are in the report or the conversation and so forth, a person naturally is going to be focused on what's broken, what's not working. And finally, feedback systems rarely have ongoing support to them. So once the feedback is given, it's not tracked and followed up or even noticed if positive change is happening. So as a coach, one of the most difficult things is working very hard with one of your clients, and other people don't see the changes that your client is attempting to make. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that leaves people feeling unclear, discouraged, isolated, as if their colleagues are against them rather than with them. In addition to that, feedback is broken because of delivery flaws. It's both the design and the delivery. So we know from Tom Rath's research in Strengths Finder 2.0 that if a supervisor focuses on an employee's strengths, the probability of them becoming actively disengaged is only 1%. And so if a manager focuses on an employee's weaknesses, 22% of the actively disengaged say that their boss gave them feedback on their weaknesses. So then the question becomes, where do the vast number of actively disengaged people come from? And the answer is that they say they didn't get any feedback at all. So the idea that no news is good news, oftentimes we hear that from our leaders, I'll let you know if I've got something that needs to change, is just wrong. That's the key thing that leads to disengagement. So providing feedback by itself is extremely important for people to be able to do in organizations, or us to be able to do with our clients, or to help them with. And it also then gives us the greatest way to make the most positive impact for a person by simply recognizing and reinforcing their strengths and having others recognize and reinforce strengths. So what makes delivery of feedback broken? All too often, feedback isn't happening when it's done poorly. And here's the research that really hit me. So coming out of the University of Pennsylvania, so I did human resources for 20 years and healthcare. I'm in Minneapolis, and I became a coach through the Hudson Institute in 2006. My wife as well went through it with me. She's an emotions researcher. She has her PhD in organizational psychology and is an emotions researcher. And I went the route of positive psychology and in my coaching practice. And I came across this research that showed that almost 40% feedback experiences actually lead to poor performance and broken relationships. And that kind of hurts when you're a person, as many of you are perhaps, where you've designed these sorts of systems, performance reviews, 9-box exercises, talent review processes, 360s, and so forth. And as an adjunct coach with a lot of different coach organizations, they always had their 360 process, which would have maybe ratings on competencies, and then it would have place for narrative comments. And if you sat down with your client, you took them through that, their attention would go to, who said this? I've been working on this my whole life. It's not going to change. And so this poorly designed 360s lead to this increase in disengagement, poor individual and team performance. So that's what really led then to the idea of, I need to change this feedback experience. And what could I bring then from the field of positive psychology that's actually going to help with that? Yeah, Benny, please.
Can you restate that stat again? That blew my mind.
Yep, almost 40% of 360s, it's actually feedback interventions lead to poor performance and broken relationships. And this is a meta-analysis done by Nowak and Mashishi. And so all of the stuff that I'm talking about here in terms of research is noted in the book. You can find the actual research articles and so forth around that. But this is where I first came across that research, was reading their meta-analysis of all the research around feedback. And then there are particular specific researchers in there that had that finding. Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I knew there had to be a better way because I'd been learning all these wonderful things about positive psychology. And I'd been studying these sorts of things with these different researchers, Robert Biswas-Diener and Tom Rath around strengths. Barb Fredrickson was one of our instructors around positive emotions and the impact of those on our physiology and our relationships and so forth. David Cooper-Ryder talking about appreciative inquiry, and came across research on positive relationships, or solution-focused coaching, talking with Tony Grant, and social network analysis by Rob Cross and Carol Dweck talking about the mindset of individuals, and then positive deviance by Jerry and Monique Sternin. So thinking, how do I bring this together in a different way? So I want you to imagine feedback a little bit differently. Imagine that your colleagues tell you what it is that they love about you, what they think are your greatest strengths. Then they go further and they say, this is what they think that you can do to be even more effective, what to do rather than what not to do. And finally, they say, if you'd like to do that, I'll be there with you. I'll support you in that. I'll look for that. I'll recognize that. I'll reinforce that. So how would it feel to receive that sort of feedback? Or as a coach, when you're in that in-between place of the person receiving feedback and sharing it with your client, to be able to offer that to your client. Here's what people love about you. This is what they think your next is. And this is how specifically they'll be there to support you in that. How would that feel a little bit different? So I think the feedback at its best is this. You trust the intention of the person that's sharing it with you. It's truly for your benefit. If you've heard that saying before, with the right intent, you can share any content. When you're with somebody one-on-one, you can pick up on what their intention is. And the words you don't need to wordsmith so much. Instead, you come with the heart of really caring and that you want that person to be even more effective. And you can stumble your way through it, but they're going to pick up on that intent. That's harder in confidential online types of feedback scenarios. Also, when there's context of the feedback, you understand the circumstances, who's saying it and in what way. What the board is needing from the CEO in their communication presentations is going to be different than what their staff need, and so forth. Easy illustration. Also, when the feedback is developmental, you've got good measures for performance-related feedback, metrics on that. And so you can focus fully on development rather than evaluation. This is what is the growth for you. And you understand what to do rather than what not to do. And we'll talk a lot about that. We'll have some exercises about that today. And further, you know how to leverage your strengths in those areas of growth for your next. Also, when feedback is done in a timely fashion, because people have a culture where they're able to talk with each other constructively on an ongoing basis. And people then offer that social support. They'll be there for you to watch for and reinforce those improvements as they happen. So for example, let's say that you and I are in the same company, and I sit down with you and I say, I love the way that you facilitated that meeting today. You were concise, you were engaging, you made eye contact with people, and you paused when you noticed questions on people's faces. And so there's one thing I think that might make it even more powerful next time we get together. And that is, I'd love to see you ask if there's any sort of resistance. Are people on board before we leave the meeting? Because then I think we'll be able to actually move more quickly as a team. And if that's something that you're interested in doing, pulling out that any sort of resistance, I'll watch for that, and we can talk about that again after the meeting next week. What do you think? So in there, we're moving with the strengths, what's next, and that social support. And it's very behavioral and specific. So those are some of the differences between what I believe makes for the shift positive approach and the traditional feedback approach. Traditionally, we're gathering information on strengths and weaknesses. Our focus is more on strengths. And rather than detailing what's ineffective, build on the successes of the past using appreciative inquiry. Instead of doing less, yeah, Jimmy.
Oh, well, I didn't want to interrupt you so much. It's just wait my turn. But thank you. It's something just occurred to me. And by the way, I read Pete's book and it's amazing. Or Pete and Jen, I should say. Oftentimes when we give feedback, we say, here's what I saw. And, I'd like something to go differently. But then we think we're being so generous by saying, what do you think you could do about that? Which which at first blush seems like a very generous offer. You're leaving it open-ended and you're looking for advice, you're inviting them to come up with a solution that they're good with. But in fact, if they don't say what you want them to hear, or if they don't say what you want to hear, you're going to correct them. And so it's going to be bad. And by giving them a specific to do, not just, I want you to build trust, but an actual, like, do this thing. I will watch for it and I will support you in it. That's so much more powerful than the whole let them try to guess what I'm thinking thing, like, which is really just a big old trap.
I'm glad that you brought that up, Jimmy, and thanks for reading the book. Yeah, we're going to do an exercise to really illustrate that so that you can feel that difference in just a little bit here, because while it's a simple concept, it's profound for the people that are offering feedback. Yeah. And so to continue then, oftentimes, as we said, you lose context with the feedback itself. You don't know who it's coming from and so forth. In our approach, you have specific context because it's not confidential. It's fully transparent. And the reason that it can be transparent is because it's focused on what to do rather than what not to do, because it is constructive rather than positive and negative. It's positive and constructive. And so there's a difference there. Instead of being focused on past failures, it's really imagining what a better future is and what the solution is to any sort of issues now. And that creates then this two-way accountability where it's open, it's transparent, and the role of the coach actually changes. It becomes more of offering allyship. Yeah, good.
Well, and it's supportive, so it has to be transparent. Right? Like, it's supported by the person delivering the feedback. If it was confidential, then that would be pretty stupid, because who knows what to look for and who knows where it's coming from. And so in that you're supporting it, it should be totally transparent. It makes perfect sense to me.
So, oops, I just lost everything on my screen here. Okay, good, it's still there. So I want to take you through three components of this approach: strengths, growth, and allyship. Okay. So we're going to start with strengths, and there, well, actually, I'll be a little bit broad again, but basically the shift positive approach takes two underlying principles. One is being grounded in positive psychology, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that is. And then the second is about social support, creating allyship for the client. And with positive psychology, I assume many of you are familiar with the concept of positive psychology. Would that be fair to say? Okay, I see some heads nodding. Yeah. Good, good. So here's Marty. And Marty, in his address as the incoming president to the American Psychological Association, said, we've for many, many years studied what breaks us down. But psychology was actually established to do three things: study how do we remediate issues that people have, how do we study intelligence, and then how do we study success? And so it's the scientific study of what's right with individuals, organizations, and communities. This idea of how can we study individuals who are flourishing and well-being and share that with others? And it's this core concept of identifying and growing the positive is not the same as understanding or alleviating the negative. It's just different. And that was a light switch moment for me. And when I came across positive psychology at the Hudson Institute, reading some of Marty's work, and then later Tal Ben-Shahar, and then finally going through Marty's Masters of Applied Positive Psychology program. So here's how Marcus Buckingham talks about it.
Martin Seligman was the past president of the American Psychological Association. In 1999, he had an inauguration speech in which he said, basically, psychology's half-baked. We've baked the part about mental illness, about disease and damage, but the other side, the side of strengths, of what makes life worth living, is unbaked. And he famously quoted that they have 40,000 studies on depression and less than 400 on joy, making the point that everywhere you look, we seem to think that excellence is just the opposite of failure. So we study divorce to learn about marriage. We study unhappy customers to learn about the happy ones. We study disgruntled employees to learn how to engage employees. We study depression and neurosis and psychosis to learn about joy. Everywhere you look, we seem to think, in our society entirely, we learn to give people credit. We focus on their debt. Everywhere you look, we seem to think that good's the opposite of bad. And if you want good, you should study bad and invert it. We're wrong, he said. If you study bad and invert it, you get not bad. And his point was just it's different. Studying depression teaches you a lot about depression. It tells you nothing about joy. We learn from our mistakes. No, we learn about the characteristics of mistakes from mistakes. You learn nothing about success from studying failure.
So mental health is more than the absence of mental illness. Well-being is more than the relief of suffering. And studying pathology, distress, and dysfunction is not the same as studying resilience and strengths and growth. So you and the leaders that you work with may be very adept at solving problems. I felt I was as an HR leader. And that's great. At the same time, we can add a whole other set of skills about understanding what's possible because it's happened, studying what's worked, and having that be the shortcut to our next successes. So I like a quote from researchers Rice and Gable, who looked at positive relationships and studying relationships at work. And they said, in practical terms, the absence of conflict and criticism in a relationship need not imply the presence of joy and fulfillment. So it's simply a mind shift. And this whole field of positive psychology has just been growing like crazy. So the study of resilience and strengths and grit and optimism and post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress disorder and mindset and emotional intelligence and many, many more. So pulling from that then, as we think about strengths, I like this idea from Marcus that strengths aren't necessarily the things that I'm good at. They're not necessarily my talents and so forth. Those are things that maybe I've developed, but strengths are the things that strengthen me. It's when I feel most alive, when I feel most engaged. And it's probably similar to Csikszentmihalyi's study of flow, but it's really about thinking about when are you at your absolute best? What is it that when you lose track of time, when you are feeling most engaged, what's happening then? What are you doing? Is it when you're in a relationship? It's when you are studying something. It's what is it that puts you in that place of your strengths? And when other people notice that about you and talk about that with you, it can be very positive in terms of your well-being. And so those individuals who are receiving that feedback on their strengths, they are more engaged, as we just talked about a moment ago. So simply focusing on people's strengths and bringing that to light is a powerful thing we can do in the feedback equation that gets looked over. And frankly, when you're sharing that with your clients, they tend to want to gloss over it. Oftentimes they want to get to, but what do I need to fix? And what we do intentionally is slow them down so that they can savor their strengths, learn from their strengths. And generally, we're going to find a place where we can apply strengths to an area of growth to create more success. So if somebody is deep analytical and they're moved into a managerial role, how do you take that analysis of stuff and put that analysis toward people to understand the inner workings of them and how to create a team, for example? So we want to point those areas of strength at any area where they want to develop. And there's lots of tools for doing that. You can do the VIA, the values in action, with your clients. It's free at the University of Pennsylvania website. It's one that I use with almost all of my clients. It's about their character, the values in action character strengths assessment. There's a website for it as well that has wonderful reports that's very, very inexpensive. Gallup Strengths Finder, Realize 2, any of those sorts of tools. So if we understand people's strengths, then next we want to talk about growth. And so this is a tree. This is not a mushroom cloud. And there's a big difference there. When we start helping people to grow, traditionally, once we ask about strengths, then we ask about weaknesses, or we say, quote, opportunities. And however, in our approach, we never ask about weaknesses. What if we never ask about weaknesses? And here's what I believe about that. Weaknesses might be interesting, informative, and insightful, but they're insufficient to make change. It still doesn't get you to where you need to go. We have to dig deeper as people who are gathering that feedback. So, but seeing weaknesses is natural. Why is that? The negativity bias. So you're all familiar with the negativity bias. Rog and Grog are standing outside of as a friend of mine, Dan Tomasolo, likes to illustrate, they're standing outside the cave. They hear a noise in there. Rog says, oh, I'm going to go investigate. And Grog says, not me. Well, we're descendants of Grog, not Rog. So it's there for a reason. It's helped us to pad around to still be on this planet. And it's basically this idea that negative emotions are stronger than positive and that potential threats are going to grab our attention. So Marty talked about it this way. I was back on campus a few years ago, and he said, the negativity bias is our default response. We have to overcome that. We have to teach people how to overcome that. And the fun part was how Marty described that negativity bias. He said, your tongue is your negativity bias. It's forever cruising around your mouth, and it's looking for any sort of intruder. And when it finds that popcorn husk, that's where it's going to go. And it's going to try to dislodge that popcorn husk. It's not that frequent that your tongue is just cruising around your teeth going, they're so clean, they're so fresh. So it takes that intentionality to move past that negativity bias. That's why it's hard to offer that feedback, because naturally we're seeing what we don't want. And we need to work a little bit harder with that. And what really helped me in this area is studying solution-focused coaching. So how do we overcome that negativity bias? We borrow from the research that Tony Grant did out of Australia into one of the most effective ways of being a coach. And that is solution-focused coaching. And there's this saying within solution-focused coaching, the solution doesn't care why the problem occurred. I like that. It's in your face. The solution doesn't care why the problem occurred. So it's hard to do less of a bad behavior. Instead, we need to identify a desired behavior. What do you want to do instead? And here we'll do a little illustration of that. So, and actually, I wanted to share one resource for you. If you're not familiar with solution-focused coaching, then here's a resource that I'd love for you to pick up. It's my kind of book. It's called Coaching Plain and Simple. And by Peter Szabo and Daniel Meyer, Szabo and Meyer. And it's my kind of book. It's thin. It has little drawings in it, and it gets right to it. And it's got great coaching examples and stuff like that. So it's a great illustration of how to start bringing some of that solution-focused coaching into your coaching. And here's an example of moving to solution. So on the left-hand side, here's the problem that I heard about Troy. He talks too much, he interrupts others, he dominates meetings. Okay, that's useless information for Troy. That's useless feedback for Troy. So in doing the interviews, I had to dig deeper. What is it that you would want instead? What would it look like? What would you see? And these were the kinds of things that came up. You'd use active listening skills, ask others for input, facilitate, seek to understand, be curious, ask questions. And then with any of these, you go deeper. What questions would he ask? When would that happen? Where would that be? Are you talking about at the leadership team? Are you talking about in your own interactions with him? What does facilitation mean to you? So it's getting to that solution-oriented side, this T-charting exercise. And here's why it's important. How many branches are on this tree? And here I want you to come off. How many branches are on the tree?
Too many to count.
Exactly. The answer is a lot. There's a lot of branches on the tree. So now how many faces are on the tree? I like the confused look on your face, Jen. Val's leaning in.
I'm not allowed to play.
Oh, I didn't even see the faces. Now I see them.
Mm-hmm. Yep, more than 10. Yeah, there's like 11 or 13 faces here. So you've got faces here. Oh, shoot. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Here. Can you see my cursor? No.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. And then here's like the Ben Franklin face, but here's the one that freaks me out. Here's the little scary baby face kind of looking up in the air there. So that one's kind of creepy. That's the creepy baby it looks like to me. That's what I see. I see a creepy baby. Okay. So nicely done. This is an illustration of something called inattentional blindness. And that is we don't see what we're not looking for. So I ask you to see branches, you see branches. Hannah started to see faces. I ask you to see faces, and all of a sudden you start seeing faces. So that's why it's important to ask people, what do you want? Because unless the stakeholder takes time to truly think about what success looks like, the client's going to be guessing, just as Jimmy was talking about. They're going to start throwing out behaviors like a puppy trying to learn, how do I get my treat? And the stakeholder probably won't recognize it when it starts to happen because they haven't seen it in their own mind's eye yet. So what we want to do is prime people to see what they want rather than what they don't. So when it happens, just like I asked you, when you see the faces, people started leaning in. You start nodding, you maybe smile, you add a comment. That's the kind of nudges we give each other every day that help us to change our behaviors. So even if Troy started acting differently in meetings, he started engaging others, asking more questions, who's going to notice if they hadn't seen it in their own mind's eye first? That's the core difference. So what comes to mind when you see this picture?
It's a chicken on the edge of a bench.
See a chicken on a bench. Okay. What else comes to mind? What else do you see? What popped into your head?
Ouch.
An eagle. Ow.
Neat.
We're looking for dinner.
Eagle hawk.
Ah, okay. So now what do you see? What popped into your head when you saw that? Anybody see a crow or a bat or a...
Mosquito.
All right. Now what do you see?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We prime people all the time. We want to prime them to see what's better, what's good, what's constructive, what's more effective, so that they see it when it happens. I prime you with talons, you see some sort of bird or insect or flying thing. If I would have primed you with a lasso or a horse or something like that, maybe you would have seen the cowboy. So it's really important how it is that we're showing up with our clients. We don't see what we aren't looking for. Again, unless you take the time to truly think about what success looks like, your client's going to be guessing. So here's the exercise then for you. The T-chart. I want you to think about somebody important to you, or for whom you would have feedback. And on the left, oh, I'm getting a little feedback there. I'm getting feedback on my feedback presentation. So just draw a T-chart, a T on a piece of paper. And I can even do this. Ooh, dragon. Yeah, Julie saw a dragon. Yeah, that's a flying creature. This might even come through. Here's a little tool you can use if you want in the chat. A little T-chart fillable. I think it's a fillable PDF. So think of somebody for whom you have feedback. And on that left-hand side, what do you want them to stop doing, not do? It might be somebody that you work with or worked with. Oftentimes that's easy to think about, somebody you used to work with. It might be somebody important to you, like your admin or somebody that does your books. It might be a particular client. But on that left-hand side, what would you want them to change and fix? Hopefully your negativity bias is going off. You're not putting on too much of a coaching hat already. Bell's smiling. It's hard not to be a coach. And now on the right-hand side, if you've got something on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, pick something from the left and go to the right-hand side and write down what you want them to do instead. What would it look like? What would you see them do? What would they do instead? What's the smallest step that you would notice? And if you're starting any of the sentences with stop, don't, wouldn't, and won't, you're not there yet. Okay. So keep working at it.
All right, Pete, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I might be overthinking this. I probably am. No, I'm thinking overthinking it. So it just help me to the first part on the right or on the left.
Mhm.
What problem am I seeing with somebody in particular? Correct?
Yeah. Yeah. What's
Okay.
the problem focused feedback? What would you want them to stop?
Are we when we say stop, we're talking about a behavior?
Change. Yeah. Behavior.
Okay, gotcha.
Like they talk too
Okay.
much, or they dominate meetings, or they need to delegate, or they're not vulnerable. They won't share what's really going on inside. They talk over everybody. They interrupt people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you.
They have a little halitosis. Yeah.
Thank God for Zoom meetings, right?
Yeah. Some sucking down coffee. Yeah. Yeah. Don't be around me. Coffee breath boy.
I was at the opera last night and the woman beside me had clearly had onions right before she came in.
Ooh. Ooh. She's singing along. Be bad. How are people coming? Has anybody been able to do a little bit on both sides? Hannah's nodding your head. Hannah, would you be brave and allow me to do a demo with you?
Demo? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did you come up with on the left-hand side for this person?
This person is my partner.
Okay.
And
yeah. Oftentimes that's
this morning I put a story on Instagram about quote from Martin Seligman, how he the question he asked on couple consultancy, not how you fight, but how you are happy for each other, what happened. So relationship is whole day in my, in my head. And yeah, relationship could be with coworkers, colleagues, but also with the partner. For example, I want him to stop throwing clothes everywhere in a house. Instead of stop throwing clothes, I try to compliment him how nice it was before Christmas, before his mom came, and he make whole house clean and nice, not with his clothes. So I can compliment him how good he could be and how so it's changed his behavior. Instead of kind of punishing him for doing bad, compliment him when he do good.
Nice.
Same thing with lots of other stuff. Like I don't like him wearing some outfit at home. Instead of saying like stop wearing that, I always give him compliment for wearing like nice outfit at home, for example. So instead of
Is it working?
yeah, it's working. Yeah, it's like in I don't know how this book in English, but it's something like Stop Barking at the Dog or something like this. It's about positive
Positive reinforcement.
Yes, positive reinforcement of something. And
Yeah.
they try, colleague, dogs, people, partners, they try to do what you compliment them for.
Nice. So what did you notice in the story from Hannah about the right-hand side?
Right-hand side, when we solution focused.
Yeah. What did other people notice about Hannah's story when she was talking about that right-hand side? Jen.
She seemed happier, lighter, excited.
So her energy was different. Yeah. Yeah. What else did you see?
She was supportive. She was like, hey, you're doing great here. I love it.
Could you see it in your mind's eye?
Totally.
Yeah. The story helped because it's like, I would love for you to show up the way that you did for Christmas in preparation for your mom. And so I see it in my mind's eye as the interviewer. So it's easy for me then, if I were your partner's coach, to say, boy, the way that you showed up for your mom at Christmas and how you took care of the house and stuff like that and picked up clothes and whatnot, do that. That's what Hannah's looking for. Yeah. Instead of you're a slob, or the house is a mess, or stop, you don't care about the place we live in. Okay. Those are concepts. You can't see that in your mind's eye. They're judgments. But we're moving from concepts to behaviors. And we're moving from what not to focus on to what you do want to focus on. What is that constructive behavior? Did anybody get stuck trying to move from the left-hand side to the right-hand side in their example that I could help? Julie.
That's interesting. When you mentioned the feedback at its best, it was the one that was like, understand what to do rather what not to do. And I was like, how can we do that? And that's what you just mentioned. So now it's clear to me, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. But we always start with the negative, right? So we need to change our mind. And it's part of the human beings. We have the negative bias. So
right. It's just recognizing that's how our brain was formed. And so anything that's said to us that's not expected is going to then go through the brainstem, fight, flight, freeze, before it gets to the amygdala, the fear base, before it ever gets to your prefrontal cortex and your logic. Yeah, Julie.
I just have a question. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. And what if people don't like positive feedback? Because believe me or not, but I used to have one client who told me that he's not about positive feedback. He doesn't like it. And it's not like something that motivates him to move. I was, of course, surprised a little bit. But yeah, there are some people like that. And it's like really interesting what to do with them. Like how to manage this, interaction.
So what I would like to do is there's a difference between positive feedback and constructive feedback. There's strengths-based feedback. Here are things that you do really well. What I notice, what I see is really effective in how you show up and so forth. And then there's the constructive feedback, which is, here's what I'd like to see you do more of. Here's what will make you more effective, or what people are saying they're looking for from you to help them be effective. That sets better with individuals who really don't like to hear about the positives, or they're at that place, they say that anyway. They're at that place where it's like, just tell me what I need to fix. That actually doesn't work, because if you tell them what they need to fix, they're going to, again, not know what to do. They'll think, oh, I stopped doing this and that'll fix it. Or they tell me that I need to communicate better, so I'm going to talk more. And that might be the exact opposite, the wrong thing to do. So I like that nuance of the difference between positive and strengths and constructive and negative. Okay. So what is constructive feedback? Yeah, Jimmy.
Pete, Joanna put a question into the chat or a comment. Joanna, do you want to elaborate on that idea?
Yeah, that'd be great. Let me help you with that. You want to understand what does the constructive of vulnerable looks like, right?
Yeah, because this is conversation with my son, who lives in China and I live in the US. So it's not like we can go next door and just, have a chat. And he's very resistant to almost anything I bring up. And I've noticed that there's not a lot of vulnerability in our relationship. It's just kind of on the surface. Yeah. So how do I bring up not vulnerable, the opposite of not vulnerable?
So that'd be vulnerable. And what does vulnerable look like to you? What would he actually, so when has he shown up in a vulnerable way?
Oh, that was before he got married.
What do you do then? What do you do then?
So our conversations were a lot deeper.
How so?
And I mean, he talked about, things that are going wrong and things that, it was, I feel like I'm getting the gloss layer.
How did he show up when he was talking about things that were going wrong? What was his demeanor? What was his tone?
He was open. He was.
Which looked like?
This is why it's a problem. What did it look like? I don't
Everyone
know.
wants Joanna.
I can't do the look. It's like I'm not getting what it looked like.
Would
what
he
it
speak faster? Would he speak slower? Was there a sadness? Was there hesitancy? Was there more of a help me figure this out? What did it look?
Yeah. There was a help me figure this out. There was a curiosity.
Huh.
About
About
whatever was going on. You know, this kind of goes along with help me figure this out. It's just that really open, like exploring together kind of a thing.
What else did his vulnerability? What else would vulnerability look like to you?
I think he was more receptive to what's going on in my life. Like it was
How did you know that he was receptive?
by what he didn't do. And that's not going to work. We really talked about.
Was he asking you questions about your life or what?
He was asking me curious questions instead of directive questions.
Okay. So I heard you say he was sharing things that were hard. He was helping. You're helping him to figure things out. He was asking you curious questions.
Yeah.
If that were to happen again, would you notice?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so now what are your observations of Joanna in that experience? Where was she looking? She was looking down. She was looking around. She was searching. She was literally searching for a picture. I would throw out some little seeds, what it might look like, and then she'd pick up on those and she would refine that. And then at the end, when I asked her if that happened, would you notice? She went, oh, yeah. And she stared straight back at the camera and said, oh, yeah, which tells me that she sees it now in her mind's eye, that if it happens, she's going to notice it and reinforce it and help him to do it again. So giving you language to be able to convey that directly to him yourself. And when it happens, when he asks that first curious question of what's going on with you? What's happening with the house? How does that feel to you? You're going to fall out of your chair. You're going to be reinforcing it so much. That's what we're doing for our clients. We're not gathering information to give to our clients. Instead, we're working on behalf of our clients to nudge those feedback providers to move from becoming stakeholders to becoming allies. So that when the behavior happens, they notice it. They lean forward. They react in a way that reinforces that behavior. That's, I think, one of the crucial differences about the approach that I take is it really had me thinking about, am I just being a coach now? Or am I taking a different role? Because I'm not gathering information for my client to give to my client. I'm working on behalf of my client to help those people see what they want rather than what they don't. So that when it happens in real time, they notice it and reinforce it, because I'm not there with them in real time. Those people are. I show up every week or 2 weeks or whatever it might be, but those individuals are there in the meeting when it happens. Yeah, Benny.
Because I've just been thinking about this. I think the one thing that's really popping out to me is how, as a coach, because I feel like this in theory and in practice, obviously, for us who deep dive into this, it makes sense. When we're in front of the person and we're working with organizations, I'm trying to see how do we communicate and convey the processes, because I feel like there's some underlying pressures and I feel like there's expectations to address the problem, call out what's wrong, and then tell them how to fix it. Right. And so how do we I will get the book. I promise you, Joanne. I promise I'll get the book. How do we then navigate and set those expectations? Because I had the same thing with a company, and I realized the problem was the CEO. And the problem with him was that what he was creating in his head was like, as I'm looking at this, I'm like, wow, I got to go back and really redesign the alliance with him, because I'm realizing that if he can't follow this, I as a coach will not be able to show up in that positive solution, based coaching, because I think a lot of what tears it down is how negative he can be with his team. So how do I go back and re-anchor that? I'm sorry, that's probably a loaded question. I probably should get the book, but I'm just asking that question.
I think it's a great question. So I'm not, I'll tell you what I'm hearing in that and what maybe I would do. So for example, like when you said, he's negative and that's impacting the culture, that's where my curiosity would go off. I'd be like, oh, what's negative? What is it that he would be doing that would actually be building the culture? When has he been able to build the culture? What did it look like then? And I'd want to know that from the people around him. So what is it that you really want him to do?
But that's the feedback that he won't get. And when I try to bring him the feedback or create the conversations that would allow it, it goes, the conversation, like, I'll put it to you like this in brief detail. We did that. We literally spent 2 months strategizing for 2024. We aligned this and we set things up so that we could have a bigger conversation. And the one goal, I said not with the one goal, but the one thing that we talked about was leveling up the work culture, because it felt very toxic and negative. He was sensing that, and he just thought, well, let me just break them down some more. And I'm like, no, we got to stop breaking people down and start building people up, right? We got to shift the narrative here. And if we don't, the new VP came in and saw the same thing. And so
how clear were the behaviors for him to do rather than to stop doing?
I think he was receptive to a point. He was receptive to some feedback, but at some point.
But how clear were the behaviors that people wanted from him to him?
They weren't clear.
Yeah.
They weren't. And you know how it is. You do a leadership meeting and then they say, well, does anybody have any questions? And nobody says anything. No feedback, right?
So it takes a lot of work on behalf as the coach to help people, just like I was doing with Joanna, to get deep into what do you want? I clearly know what you don't want. You don't want to have these boring calls that are just surfacey. But what is it that you want instead? What would it look like? What would you see? What would you notice? So that then when you share that with the CEO, so if it's this new VP, I want him to do this. I'd like him to do this. I'd like him to do this. Then you can share that with him. So at least he's got the path. Otherwise, he's going to throw out behaviors like, I'm just going to force my way through it. But the clearer that path is for him, then they become experiments for him to try. I could try this. I could try this. I could try this. What I'll add to it, one of the other things another book that I'd really recommend for you is called Coachability, the Leadership Superpower. This is by another guy by the name of Kevin Wilde. He's local. He was the chief learning officer at General Mills. And he did studies within General Mills because he found that he would present the top 500 up and coming leaders to the executive team every year. And he loved doing that, and they loved it and whatnot. But he got concerned because a fair number of those individuals washed out. They didn't actually get to the level that they thought those leaders were capable of. And what he found is it came down to one question. Does this person seek and act on feedback? What he found was a complete inverse correlation, that the older the individual was and the higher in the organization they were, the less receptive they were to feedback, except for the 20% who weren't. Those individuals had very specific ways of asking for feedback, acting on feedback. So instead of saying, what'd you think of the meeting? Those leaders would say, give me one thing that you thought worked well in today's meeting and one thing that you think is going to make it better next time. So it's all these different specific behavioral shifts. But you might also, when it comes to providing feedback, there's two ends to it here. Is your person receptive and do they act on feedback? and how do you provide it? Kevin and I are going to do an ICF presentation coming up because he's going to talk about that end of it. How do you get your leader ready for the feedback? And he has a little online assessment and things like that. And then I talk about how do you provide feedback in a constructive way? How do you actually create the culture, the environment around so that people don't just throw out what needs to be fixed and think, okay, I'm done. But instead they become an ally. They become engaged with that person and realize that it's their responsibility to be part of it. Otherwise, as I like to say, don't expect change to happen unless you're willing to be part of it. Yeah. Thanks for throwing in what you did there, Benny. I went off on a bit of a tangent, but I hope that that's helpful. So, all right. So I want to take us back to this then. We're not going to do a breakout room, but here's what I hope you saw in this is all I was doing with Joanna was asking these questions. What would you see? What would you want them to do instead? What would that look like? How would he behave differently? What would you notice? What's the smallest step that they would take? Until we got to that place where she looked around and then she said, yeah, you do this and this and this. Would you notice? Yes. That's the role of the coach in my approach, is to get people to that place where they can see it in their mind's eye. So the last part then we've actually started talking a little bit about is about allyship. That feedback is relative and relational to the person providing it. So I'll point you to an article by Marcus Buckingham and Ashley Goodall. It's in a Harvard Business Review article called The Feedback Fallacy. And he does a phenomenal job in there. It was one of the top 13 articles, they say, ever that's come out of Harvard Business Review. And the points in it are this, that feedback is not truth, but it's your truth. And it's always relative to your own expectations and comfort zone. So feedback is a relationship between the person you're talking with and that leader. And the more you help them to understand that and see the dynamics of the relationship rather than here's feedback for that person, the more effective it's going to be. And here's the key to it. We don't change by ourselves. Take a moment to think about a large challenge that you went through and who was there to support you through that. How did they show up for you? A divorce, a move, a role that you took on. And so Marshall Goldsmith finds this. He said that, there's only, in the research that Marshall Goldsmith did, only one variable was proven over and over as central to long-term change. And that was, did the client share their goals with the people around them in that ongoing interaction and follow-up with colleagues, the follow-up factor. Otherwise, he found that the impact of the coaching was no more than chance. So we have to keep those people engaged. And I love this research by Stefanucci, Profit, Schnall, and Harbour, where they had individuals that were walking by and they had them stand in front of a hill. And they would ask one of the two people, how steep is that slope? And the second person was standing 3 feet away, facing the other direction, but just standing next to him. And they weren't allowed to say anything, give any sort of signals. And then they had other people come by that were by themselves, and they had them stand in front of that hill and estimate the slope of that hill. Those people that were had somebody standing next to them saw the slope as 10 to 20% less steep than those people that were by themselves. They redid the research, and they had individuals who were by themselves just think of somebody supportive, neutral, or a detractor. Those individuals that were primed to think of somebody supportive of them saw that slope again to be 10 to 20% less steep than people who were primed to think of somebody that was a detractor. So they finished their article with this. If social support, opportunities for emotional disclosure, differences in hope, optimism, self-worth, and self-efficacy cause people to see challenges in a more moderate way, then people who enjoy these resources will live in a subjectively less demanding and less stressful world. Conversely, those deprived of such resources will live in a world where hills are steeper, distance is greater, precipices deeper, and other kinds of physical challenges more daunting and demanding. This is something we can do for our clients. We can help them to see the world less challenging by creating allies for them, by creating support systems for them by turning stakeholders into allies. And the way that we do that then, we've been asking people, about this individual strengths and what they can do to be even more effective. We go a step further and we say, and what is it that you'll do to support them? What's one thing specifically you can do to support them? So Joanna, what is one thing you can do to support your son in showing that vulnerability that you were looking for?
Ask for what I need.
Yeah. And the amazing thing that we find in doing the interviews, the 360 narrative 360 interviews, is that when you help people to get to that solution, oftentimes the close of the conversation is, I can tell them this myself. I just didn't know. Because the amazing thing is when you're working through that, getting from what not to do to what to do, the answer to that, they don't know. They don't know what they want until you help them identify it. And once they do, then it's like, yeah, I can talk about this. So in our 360s, we ask each individual to identify that one commitment they're willing to make so that by the time we're done with the interviews, that client's going to have 6, 8, 10, 12 allies around them, all willing to do at least one thing different to reinforce those new behaviors. That feels a lot different. And it takes what Marshall did in his research and puts it on steroids. You have this group of people around you. So one of my HR friends, she went through the coach she's a coach, but she went through the certification. She's never done the Shift Positive 360 with any clients, but she said she uses it every day. Managers show up and they want to talk about a problem employee or whatever. They come in and they're talking about the problem, and she just sits there and says, and what would you want? When has it worked? What did it look like then? What would it look like now? And then they leave, and then the next person comes in. And what would you want? And what would it look like? And what would you see? And how can you help? So it's a change. It's a shift in how we show up as a coach. It's not a technique. It's not 13 magic questions. It's the change that happens in you so that you can be present in difficult conversations to help people to get to the constructive. And when we can do that, I have this saying, when we don't know how to say something constructively, we say it confidentially. So our goal then is to help people to talk constructively with each other. And that then shifts to the system of openness. So the interviews are not confidential. I believe that confidentiality is a symptom of a broken system. And if we can help people to identify what they want rather than what they don't, then we can get past that need for confidentiality. So back to the beginning, when feedback is useful, when people have that context, they understand the intention, you can share that intention, when they know what to do, when it's timely, and when there's that social support. So back to these differences then. And the cool thing about it is that there's no summary report. So oftentimes, if you're doing narrative 360s, you then have to boil it down into a big summary report. And you say, here are 3 things for you to pay attention to. So people love about you. And I think that's wrong, because that moves us from being coaches to being from a place of curiosity to being in a place of knowing. And we don't live in their world. We come in and out of their world a little bit. But that's rather an assumption to say, out of all the things, here's what you should pay attention to. I went away from that and I started sharing all of the just the raw information. The report is actually just people's comments that I'm taking notes on, the constructive notes. I don't take notes on what's broken. And as you go through that with the client and you coach them through that process of reading all of those comments, the amazing thing is they pay attention to the things you would have skipped over. I would have skipped over. And they are like fine with the things that you think, it's like, well, you should pay attention to this. It's like, yep, I'm aware of that one. That's fine. But tell me about this. Help me understand this. And that's where I can offer context, tone, and so forth. So that was a big lesson for me through this process was, and what's kind of great is when you're done, you're done. When you're done with the interviews, you're done with the 360. Then you're moving on to the debrief and you're helping the person to make sense of it. You're actually in that place of being a coach as they read through it and you read through it together and you say, what did you see there? What's striking you? Why did you laugh? Why did your brow furrow? So digging into strengths, using the T-chart to get clear on what to do, turning people from stakeholders into allies, and being open, eliminating that need for confidentiality. This is what we do at Shift Positive. We help leaders that want to develop and look for insight and support. We help coaches and leadership development professionals learn this methodology and to use it as narrative 360s or other ways. We do manager training, we do keynotes, stuff like that. And here's, if you're interested in learning more about this, we have an intro to certification coming up on Monday from 3 to 4. You'll find that on our website. If you go to that little scan thing again, I'll drop it back in there. That'll take you right to that page where you can then sign up to ask detailed questions about the certification and the cost and how it works in the technology platform and voice to text transcription and all that kind of stuff. We're in early bird for May and June, and also Minneapolis. May and June is virtual certification that we do for coaches. We're running one right now. We've got a class. I'm going to be meeting with them in 12 minutes. And then in person in Minneapolis in the fall in September. So, and there's 18.5 ICF CCEs with that. Yeah. And again, if you want to put your information in on our website, I'll see who registers today, and I'll do a drawing for a book and send you out a book if that's of interest to you. So, some of our people are shift partners, coaches that are all certified in this. When organizations want to work to do an entire leadership team or something like that, who comes in, some of the places where we've worked, where our work is at. And yeah, let me stop sharing. And I think I can do about 5 more minutes, if that's okay, Jimmy.
As long as you can, but I don't want you to be late for your session. Obviously, you've got a workshop going on. First of all, Peter, thank you so very much. This was incredible. Wow, I love when the whole group is so engaged. This was another fantastic session. So thank you very much for taking the time and squeezing it in right before your other session. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for coming today and being so engaged and offering up your voices. We always love that. Speaking of offering up your voices, the survey link is now in the chat. You guys can click that and go ahead and take a quick survey. What else we've got? Oh, in case you couldn't see, there's some stuff behind me here. So which one is it? This one, our Luminous conference. I can't get my finger to go the right way. I can't do it. Anyway, Luminous, that is going to be May 17th, 2024. In Fort Lauderdale, we have Marsha Reynolds as our keynote speaker, and her good friend Eddie Turner is going to be also on stage. If you snap the QR code, it'll take you directly to the registration, and you can register for the event right there. It is in May. It's in Fort Lauderdale, so if you can make it, please do. You guys from Ukraine, I know it's a long trip, but if you want to make it over, the weather's still pretty nice in May, so come on over. That's all I've got about that. Does anyone have a quick question for Pete before he has to run? Irina says, I'd like to say how grateful I am for this session. It was so insightful, and I'm taking with me so many valuable resources. Love hearing that.
Thank you all. Yeah, this was wonderful. I really appreciate it. And reach out if there's anything that we can do for you. Happy to. So.
Pete, I really love your method, because I literally had a 360 where we asked what the manager did well. And of course, it's one you can't edit. What does his leader do well was the question. And the answer was one word, nothing.
Yeah, I've seen those. Opportunity to stick in the knife. Yeah. We got to get away from that. We can change that. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Peter, you mentioned a resource earlier that I didn't capture. You mentioned there was a resource that you use. It's almost like a free site, like a character thing. I don't know if
I don't know
if maybe you can point it.
Yeah, the values in action character strengths assessment. So
and you also mentioned an article, and I didn't get the author, the one that was like one of the best, like from the HBR.
Actually, Joanna's already put it in the chat. So she put the link to it.
Yeah. Feedback fallacy.
Oh, that's the feedback fallacy. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So many resources. Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pete.
University of Pennsylvania. Good. Authentic Happiness with University of Pennsylvania is now in the chat. And if you navigate to Authentic Happiness, you're going to see questionnaires and you're gonna find like a million. So if your clients like questionnaires, but in there is the VIA, the VIA survey of character strengths.
Awesome.